Julie Metz and Danielle Trussoni are two of my favorite writers that I've had the pleasure and honor of having at Spoken Interludes, my reading series that I started 25 years ago. And it makes me so deeply happy to have them here tonight at Book Yaya and even together. So it's going to be a wonderful event. Some quick housekeeping. Danielle and Julie are going to read from their books and speak a little bit about them, and then they're going to have a discussion. They have so many great, fascinating things to talk about. I know you're going to want to be a part of that, and there are 3 ways that you can do that. You can highlight the participant section of your screen, go over to your name, highlight it, a blue box will appear, you'll see more, click on that, you'll see raise hand. I'll see your hand raised. I'll call on you for Julie and Danielle, and you can ask them a question directly. You can go to the bottom of your screen where there is a button that says reactions, and you can click that. You'll see a little hand, and you can raise your hand there. I will look out for it. I will call on you for them, and you can speak to them directly that way. Or you can go to the chat feature, click on that. It'll highlight on the right side of your screen. You can type in a question. I can read it for you to them, or I can call on you and you can read it. So lots of ways to participate. It's a friendly, wonderful hour. Please be part of it if you would like. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Julie, who is going to read to us this evening. Julie Metz is the author of the New York Times bestselling memoir, Perfection, which came out before this one, a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers selection. She has written on a wide range of women's issues for publications, including the New York Times, the Huffington Post, Dame, SheKnows.com, Salon, Slice, Redbook, Glamour, Next Tribe, and Coastal Living. Her essays have appeared in the anthologies The Moment, edited by Larry Smith, who created the 6-word memoirs, and The House That Made Me, edited by Grant Jarrett. Julie has been a podcast guest on Dear Sugar Radio, co-hosted by Cheryl Strayed and Steve Almond, Women of the Hour, hosted by Lena Dunham, BBC radio show The Why Factor on the subject of truth, and U-Turns on co-hosted by Julie Herzig and Lisa Oz. Julie is a fellow of the Yaddo Corporation, the MacDowell Colony, the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, and the Vermont Studio Center. She is also a winner of the Literary Death Match, the International Competitive Reading Series. Julie lives with her family in the Hudson River Valley. She posts profiles of her neighbors at thehudsonwhaler.com, and you can read her post on local development and environmental issues at MB.com and find all information at juliemetz.com. She is here tonight to celebrate her great new memoir. Please help me welcome Julie Metz.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really delightful to be back. I loved being on Spoken Interludes, and I'm so pleased that we could do this evening together. And especially lovely because Danielle is a colleague, but also a friend. So it's really fun to be able to see each other, especially during this time when we're all in our houses still. I'm going to, I'll tell you a little bit about EVA and Eve. The title refers to my mother, who was born in Austria, in Vienna, in 1928. And at that time, that was her given name, Eva. When she came to the United States as a child, during the war, she changed it to Eve when she became an American citizen. And I was always struck by this because it seemed sort of a subtle change, but also quite meaningful as an example of her wish to become American, to assimilate. The book is the story of how my mother's Jewish family escaped from Nazi-occupied Vienna in 1940. And this happened at a time not so different from our present day, when there's a lot of discussion about immigration and what it means and who is an American. So the conversation was happening then, and we're still having that same conversation. The restrictive immigration laws of that time trapped many Jews in Europe. They just couldn't get out, and the challenge was how to get an American visa. And the book moves between the past and the present. It follows my own research journey into the past and also is my my loving attempt to recreate the Vienna, sort of a golden time in Vienna that existed for Jews before the war. And I'll read just a very short bit from the prologue. I like to show everybody a photograph that is just opposite in the book. It's just opposite the opening of the prologue. And it's this photograph of my mother. I don't know if you can see that. She was about 9.5 at the time. And the opening prologue is Eva at 9. I've never met this sweet child who smiles at me with the confidence of a well-loved daughter. She is pretty, well-groomed, well-fed. She poses on her own in a comfortable sitting room, but in her easy gaze, I sense the presence of other people, parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, and the unknown photographer. Behind her, a few hints of the room's decor. Rounded backrest of an elegant wood chair, sideboard decorated with a lacy cloth, door framed in carved molding against a patterned wallpaper, all recede in layers of gauzy focus. What is it about this girl? She seems at once so innocent, yet so knowing. Her plump cheeks are incarnadine, like a morsel of blush-tinted marzipan, yet something about the intensity of her dark eyes tells me that she is fiercer than her sweet presentation. She will need that fierceness. In 2 months, this girl's country will be taken over by a cohort of extremists, led by an authoritarian germaphobe who hates people of her kind. He sees them as filth, vermin, contamination. In truth, there have always been people in her country who hated her ethnic group, but now their views will be fully validated and normalized. In 6 months, this well-appointed sitting room will be ransacked, and most of the remaining possessions that aren't shattered or stolen by an emboldened police force will be sold off so that the family can survive for 2 years. The girl's parents will spend those 2 years in a struggle against a mighty bureaucracy as they attempt to get out of a once beloved city whose majority population now sees them as enemies of a new empire. Having lost all rights, the family will now be stateless. Across the ocean, the latest incarnation of the xenophobic, isolationist America First movement is in full sway. Immigrants are suspect, even those who have thrown off most of their traditional customs in an effort to assimilate, to become Americans. The girl looks at me intently, and I meet her gaze. 80 years have passed since a camera captured her face in the midst of a gentle winter afternoon. Now the gyres of history have revolved. Promoted by another would-be authoritarian and obsessive hand washer, America First is back, emblazoned on posters, t-shirts, and red baseball caps. I flip the photograph. On the reverse side, a diligent family archivist has written January 1938 in soft pencil. The 9-year-old girl in the frilly dress lived in Vienna, Austria, where a world of safety and comfort was about to end. Her name was Eva, and she was my mother. I knew her as Eve. And now I will turn things over to Danielle. Are we frozen? Oh, okay. Sorry, we lost, I'm having an audio problem. Sorry, can you hear me now? Oh, okay. I'm going to log out and come back in.
Okay. Danielle Trussoni is the New York Times, USA Today, and Sunday Top 10 best-selling author of the supernatural thrillers Angelology and Angelopoulos. She is the co-creator of the crypto.
I'm going to sit downstairs.
So I'm going to see who needs to be muted. Sorry about that, y'all. Okay. I'm going to reintroduce Danielle so that we can all hear about her. Danielle Trussoni is the New York Times, USA Today, and Sunday UK top 10 bestselling author of the supernatural thrillers Angelology and Angelopoulos. She is the co-creator of the Crypto Z audio series podcast, a companion to the Ancestor. She writes the horror column for the New York Times Book Review and has recently served as a jurist for the Pulitzer Prize in Fiction. Trussoni holds an MFA in fiction from the prestigious Iowa Writers Workshop, where she won the Michener Copernicus Society of America Award. Her books have been translated into 33 languages. She lives in the Hudson Valley with her family and her pug, Fly. Learn more at danielletrussoni.com. And please help me welcome Danielle with her gorgeous new novel, The Ancestor.
Thank you, Delani. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm so happy to be doing this with Julie Metz, who, as she mentioned, we're colleagues, but we're also friends. I've known Julie for about 10 years now, maybe a little bit less, but I was first introduced to her when I was a judge for the Discover Great New Writers Award from Barnes & Noble, and I came across her first book and just fell in love with it. I loved the voice. She's just such a talented writer. And so I'm very pleased to be here. So thank you for having me. And thank you, Elise, for co-hosting. It's really a pleasure to be here. So the novel that I'm going to read to you from tonight is called The Ancestor. And I think the reason that it pairs well with Julie's book, even though the subject matter and tone is quite different, is that both of these books are about family and family history and how these stories and these genealogies affect someone in the present moment. I think for me, this moment in time, actually a few years ago when DNA tests were popular, they still are. You can buy a DNA test and spit into a tube and kind of send it off and have this chart of your family's ancestral breadth sort of delivered to you. I think ancestry and genealogy has become fascinating for a lot of people. And I actually took one of those tests, spit into a tube, and I sealed it up and I sent it away. And it came back telling me something that deeply surprised me. I was raised Italian American. My last name is Trussoni. My father's family, there were 12 kids, big Catholic Italian family. And I got my DNA test back and it said that I was only 1.5% Italian. And I just went, oh, what's going on? Is there a secret that I need to know? And so I started doing some digging, and I will tell you after my reading what I discovered, but that initial shock brought me to the subject of ancestry and genealogy. And so while this is definitely a novel, definitely fiction, it was inspired by that. So I'm just gonna read you the beginning of my novel. It's a couple of pages, about 3 or 4 pages that I'm going to read. And it will give you a little flavor about this story. To discover you are the heir to a noble title in the 21st century is like winning a fortune in the lottery, the Mega Millions, or a Powerball jackpot, only to find your prize will be paid out in francs or lira. Suddenly, you are rich, but rich in a currency that has no value in the modern world. Or so it seemed to me upon learning that I was the last living descendant of the ancient house of Montebianco, a family whose power, from the Middle Ages to the unification of Italy in the 19th century, was immense, whose sons, because only sons mattered in those unenlightened times, had fought religious wars and married minor princesses and sired noble children, but whose fortunes and fertility had diminished as the modern world rose, leaving me, Bert Monty, a 28-year-old American woman with few social graces and zero knowledge of European history, the sole blood heir to an ancestral domain in the mountains of northern Italy. It all began one Saturday morning, just before Christmas. I was living alone, although Luca's things were still at the house. He'd been taking clothes to his new apartment slowly, week by week, a pair of jeans here, a t-shirt there, in an effort to keep our lives intertwined. His plan was working. We saw each other often and had even gone out for dinner and a movie the month before. While we'd been separated for 6 months, and it had been my idea for him to move out, I found it comforting to have my husband around. We'd been together for nearly 10 years, and despite the problems, which were mostly my problems, we would both agree, it was hard to imagine life without him. My parents were both gone, and I had no brothers or sisters, aunts or uncles or cousins. Luca was the only family I had. Until, that is, the letter arrived from Italy. A knock came at the door, and I left off decorating the Christmas tree, a 3-foot fir festooned with tinsel and blinking lights, to answer. It was a cold, sunny December morning, the sky so bright that the envelope glinted like a mirror in my hand. I signed my name on an electric pad, wished the delivery man happy holidays, and was back inside before I saw that the envelope was addressed not to me, Bert Monty, but to someone named Alberta Isabel Eleanor Vittoria Montebianco. I sat down at the kitchen table, pushing aside tinsel and glass bulbs so that I could get a better look. The return address was from Torino, Italia. A parade of bright Italian stamps floated at the top right corner of the glossy envelope. The words Alberta Isabel Eleanor Vittoria Montebianco scrolled across the center. Although everyone called me Bert, my given name was Alberta, so that part made sense. I was hesitant to open something that might not belong to me, but Alberta was my name after all, and the address was my address, and so without further hesitation, I ripped the envelope open. A sheaf of thick A4-sized pages fell into my hand. The top page was covered in calligraphy, and in the bottom right corner, gleaming like a first-place medal, shone a golden seal of a castle floating between 2 mountains. The paper alone was something to behold. Heavy bond linen stock, creamy and thick, with an ink signature pressed into the fiber by the nib of a fountain pen. The text was dense and entirely foreign. Turning the pages, I tried to find something I could understand. But aside from the name Montebianco, which appeared about every other line, it was entirely incomprehensible. Holding up the envelope, I said the name out loud, Alberta Isabel Eleanor Vittoria Montebianco, fumbling over the syllables as if I were a child learning to read. My first thought was to call Luca. He always knew what to do. Logical, reliable, sane. These were the qualities I loved about him, and the qualities that bound us still, even after all the rough times we'd been through. I'd known Luca most of my life. We had attended the same schools. We had practically grown up together, and he knew me better than anyone. He had grieved with me after the last miscarriage, and he was the one who suggested we go to therapy, volunteering to join me when it was clear that I needed it more than he did. Luca had always believed that with a little work and preparation, we could survive everything. But one thing was certain, neither of us could have prepared for a letter like the one that came from the estate of the Montebianco family. I remember sitting there in my kitchen, turning the envelope over in my hands. A strange feeling came over me then, clear as a voice in my ear. It was a warning, a premonition of danger. I wonder now, after all that I've learned about the Montebianco family and all that has happened since that snowy December day, what my life would be like had I tossed the envelope into the recycling bin with the junk mail and old newspapers. But I didn't throw it out. I didn't throw out the letter, and I did not pay attention to the creeping sense of danger slithering up my spine. I simply slipped the papers back into the envelope, grabbed my jacket, and went out into the cold, bright morning to find Luca.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Danielle. Both of these are books that you have to start reading tonight. They're complete page turners, and they happily kept me up for many evenings. Just to start y'all off, and since y'all both kind of lovely, and a fabulous coincidence, read the beginning, which looks at birthright, names, mothers and daughters, how our identities change. Not to mention, which I'd also love for y'all to address at some point in the evening, that both of you, Danielle, your novel almost entirely, a little bit in New York, and Julie, your memoir partly in Austria, had to balance this difficult act of setting your work in a different country, which I think y'all both did some time traveling in. So lots of stuff for y'all to talk about. And I would love for y'all to begin with the sense of identity, with names, family, mothering, that, if you'd like to jump in. Thank y'all.
Yes, I hope that the reading went okay. There was some kind of glitch at some point. So I hope that you were able to hear.
It was beautiful. We heard you beautifully. Yeah.
I wasn't sure when the problem began. I was so struck, Danielle, while you were reading, that one of the overlaps in our stories as well is that, without any spoilers, because really it's such a great story, is that both of our books also deal with this idea of otherness, and that there are families where you feel that you belong or you don't belong, and that in your story, very much so, there's a kind of other quality that's very mysterious and frankly kept me up late at night. It was very scary, but in a good way. And so I was wondering if you would like to talk about that a little bit. That in my book, of course, my family was Jewish and they were the others. So it struck me, that's really a very common thread in the stories, and that it also weaves into this idea of family.
Yeah, I think that was one of the main reasons I wrote this book, actually, is this sense of what does it mean to belong, and what does it mean to be outside of that kind of community, and what does it mean even beyond that to meet the extreme other. For those who finished the book, the end, there is a sort of extreme othering in the Ancestor, and it's something that's always fascinated me. The character Bert in the Ancestor is from a sort of tight-knit Italian-American community, but she's always been sort of held at a remove in that community, and she's never fully understood why. Even her husband, Luca, who's part of that community, has his own family has considered her to be a little bit beyond the pale. And part of her journey is discovering why. And as you heard in the piece that I read, the Montebianco family, which is the family that she's descended from, that was a surprise to her. People in the village know about that family, even from all the way back in Italy. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing that really fascinates me about small communities and ethnic communities and immigrants, right? Because this book partially began because my great-grandparents were from a small village in the Italian Alps. And when I was growing up, I would hear stories about all the little things that everyone knew about each other. And interestingly enough, that particular village all decided to kind of immigrate together to the same village in the United States. Wow. So not everyone all at once, but like the children. So the people in their 20s were all moving over at the same time to the same place. So they carried these histories with them, and something that your grandparents did would still be there to sort of define who you were. I remember being told, I was a kid, but, the Pedretti family, basically we know that they will cheat you on this and this and this, or, this and this. And these are like people who probably, have absolutely nothing to do with what their grandparents, obviously didn't have anything to do with what their grandparents did. But yeah, so that's a long sort of way to say that this idea of being tight-knit and carrying over otherness is really something that immigrants do. I'm sure that you found, I mean, obviously there's the obvious otherness of what your family went through, what your mother in particular went to, changing her identity in some ways to fit into her new country. But how did you see that growing up with her?
Yeah, it's very interesting because when I started doing research, I think what was particularly interesting about the Jewish community in Vienna, it represented about 10% of the Viennese population, which was in 1938, there were about 200,000 Jews in a city of 2 million. And they had a very outsized impact on the culture. I mean, just anecdotally, composers, there were writers, there was Sigmund Freud, there was Albert Einstein, there was just a lot of things going on. But the community was very tight. That is to say that people were still practicing their faith and they saw themselves as Jewish. And at the same time, they felt incredibly integrated into the city. One of the questions I had when I was doing my research was, why didn't they leave earlier? Why didn't people flee sooner as soon as Hitler came to power in Germany? Why weren't they applying for visas then? And the answer was that they felt that they belonged in this city, even though it's a Catholic country, and even though they were distinctly a minority. My mother gave an interview that I used as source material when I was writing, and one of the most poignant comments that she made was from her father, who said, I'm paraphrasing, but it's actually, I quoted in the book because it was so powerful to me, that when you live in Vienna, you should be quiet. You shouldn't make a sort of advertise yourself as a Jew, but at the same time, you should live as a Jew, that you shouldn't feel ashamed. And then of course, what happened was that suddenly overnight in March of 1938, the Nazis arrived, and that's the only thing you were. It didn't matter that you had a life, you built businesses, that you were a creative person or anything else that you'd done in your life. Even my grandfather had fought for the emperor in the First World War. That didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was that you were Jewish, this ethnic identity. And so I think for my mother, when she came here, there was the same kind of push and pull of very much a desire to assimilate and belong and belong. And they loved New York, and they really found a home in New York. And there were, of course, many, many German and Austrian immigrants who came to New York, all to the Upper West Side, where they sort of turned it into a village. My father told me that when he met my mother, you heard German on the streets on the Upper West Side. So in a way, they kind of made it into their little Vienna and their little Berlin again. So I think that's very much, people do want to belong, and they feel a craving to belong. And of course, people want to bring their families with them. So I think in your book, of course, then we sort of see the sort of the ultimate sort of secret that one might have in a family, something that is away in the back of history that nobody wants to talk about. But maybe you could speak a little bit more about how I was curious how you came up with this particular idea of manifesting otherness.
Yeah, I want to talk about this because people often say, did you just start writing the book and you had this kind of crazy idea at the end, and then you just put this thing at the end? Because the ending is very surprising for some people, I'll have to say. Mm-hmm. I've had reactions where people were like, oh my God, I love that twist at the end. And I've had the reaction where people were like, oh my God, I couldn't handle that twist at the end, right? It kind of goes both ways. But the twist at the end that Julie's talking about, which is the extreme otherness, this idea of Bert, the main character, discovering the secret about her family, was really what brought me to the story. There's a kind of, I don't know how to talk about it without giving too much away, other than to say that it delves into sort of extreme ancestry, right? It looks at us as human beings in a sort of broad way, not just as belonging to France or to Italy or to, Sudan or, to Japan or something, but as being part of a human race, right? And what that means. And part of the inspiration for that was many people have read it, this book called Sapiens, right? That like sort of takes this long view of human history and talks about what human beings were like before Homo sapiens and what human beings were like before Neanderthals, and, sort of going back in time in an archaeological way. And that fascinates me. Of course, I'm fascinated by our culture and human beings, but I'm also very fascinated by how we got to be what we are as people, as Homo sapiens. So yeah, there was a lot of sort of deep time research that went into it, and I reverse engineered a lot of the story to be able to do that in some ways. It's not easy to talk about sort of that subject and bring people into it. So that was my challenge.
Yeah. How did you go about, in your book, right at the beginning, there's a family tree, and the family tree, of course, is very important in your story. And I was sort of curious how you kind of pieced together the family, that sort of created your family.
Yeah, so I will show you that family tree. It's getting dark very rapidly, so if I disappear, I'm going to have to get up and turn a light on. The sunshine was more. So this is the family tree that Julie is talking about, and it's the Montebianco family tree, and it starts all the way up here with members of the Duke of Savoy's family from the Piedmont in Italy back in the 12th century. And so I actually made a family tree, and I made all of the characters between the present and that far back. And that was just so much fun. And I also based a lot of these characters on historical figures. So I went to the Aosta Valley where the book ends up being set. We start in New York, but she goes to Italy up in the mountains in the Alps. And I went there and I went to museums and I started looking at actual family trees. And I just had so much fun sort of collecting all this information and putting it together. I think that my journey, writing a novel like this is much different than yours, Julie. I've written 2 memoirs as well, and Julie and I actually met because both of us had written memoirs. Her first book was a memoir, and I wrote a memoir about my first book was a memoir about my father, who was a Vietnam vet. And a lot of our friendship has been sort of revolving around family stories and what it means to write a memoir. And I know, just because I know you personally, that this journey for you to write this story was, it wasn't a vacation. I took a trip to Italy and it was fun, right? I had a lot of great wine and great food. But Julie has really, this is a labor of deep family excavation, and something that I think is so important right now. I read this book and I was just heartbroken by it. I love it so much. Can you tell me just about the process of finding not only the creative stamina, but the emotional stamina to go back into these periods and to open up parts of your history that are a little bit painful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sort of started when, it started right after my mother died. My mother and I had a relationship that had a certain amount of conflict in it. Of course, I thought about it for some years and understood that in some way the conflict that we had was related to the trauma that she'd suffered as a child. After she died, I'll just back up and say that while she was living, she would tell some stories, and they were her stories. She tended to tell them the same stories and always in the same way. I don't like to say rehearsed, but if you can imagine that she told them in a way that she could bear, and that over time she had developed a way of telling the stories so that she could bear to tell them. But there was a lot that was missing. After she died, my father asked me to go through her belongings, and I was going through a drawer that was clearly her secret drawer. She kept slips and nightgowns, and she knew nobody was going into this drawer. And in the way back of the drawer, I pull out a book, which actually looks quite a lot like the book, the little book here on the cover. It was a small canvas autograph book, the sort that children had. They were very popular in Germany and Austria at the time. And inside were messages from, her friends, family members, teachers. And the first, I asked my father, have you ever seen this book before? And he said no, he'd never seen it. They were married for 54 years. So this was clearly the secret book. And it wasn't that there was anything in that book that was so revolutionary. I mean, the little writings were very sweet and tender, but what it told me was that that book had been holding a lot of pain and a lot of memories. So when I started going back, part of it was I wanted to find out if my mother was a reliable narrator, if the stories that I'd heard as a child were true. Some of them seemed so incredible that they were beyond belief. So that was part of my research. But the other part of it was also just to find out more about what she had actually experienced. There were 2 missing years that I knew very little about, which were the years between 1938, when the Nazis arrived, and then 1940, when they finally left. There was no one left to tell me. And so I did a lot of that research that I did, historical research that I did, was really with the idea of filling in the empty holes. And it was at times it was truly heartbreaking to do it. But by that point, by the time I was traveling back to Vienna, I went back several times to do research. I felt really committed and engaged by the process. So in a way, not so different from the way that I know, because I know you, how dedicated you are to your research process, that once you're in it, I really couldn't let it go. And it did take a lot of years to do this, but I was working. In fact, I started doing some of the work when I was finishing my first book. So that's really, I would say that there was a kind of commitment. I felt like I needed to do it for myself, for my mother, but also for our family, so that we would, as a family, have all those missing stories. Yeah, so it's, I know another theme in both of our books is the mother-daughter connection. And of course, in your book, there's a most unusual mother-daughter connection that evolves, but over the course of a very complicated family that you lay out. But it really does speak a lot about the sort of the emotional journey of motherhood. And I was wondering if you might like to talk about that a bit.
Sure. I am going to turn on a light really quick, though.
Yeah.
I think you're going to lose me in a minute. Just one second.
Okay. Well, I'll just carry on. I mean, I'll just say for my own book,
Is that better?
the book is really about a mother and daughter and our connection. But why don't you take it from there and about your own story?
So motherhood is a very large part of this novel, because Bert, the protagonist, desperately wants to be a mother. She wants to have a child, and one of the reasons her relationship with her husband Luca doesn't work is because she's had a number of miscarriages, and she just feels emotionally drained, and is depressed about that. And so they took time apart, and that's where we meet her, right, is in the middle of this, when this letter comes and she has this other sort of journey. I think part of the reason she actually goes for it, right, like she goes and she finds out about this other family and she goes to Italy, is because she wants to find there's some idea at the back of her mind that maybe there's something wrong with me, or maybe there's something in my family that will explain this, why I can't have a child. And I won't give away the ending, but she finds a way. She doesn't, she finds a way to become a mother without actually becoming one. And I think that, this is a theme that I'm finding is in a lot of my work. It's about the family that we make rather than the biological family. And, she definitely makes her own family throughout the course of the novel. And I think that saves her in some ways, like that gives her purpose and meaning. So yes, I mean, the mother-child bond is a very important part of the story, but I think also, just in life in general, that who we nurture and who we bring into our inner circle is almost as important as the biology of it all.
Mm-hmm. I do want to, there are two questions, but I also want to say that speaking to what you just said, Danielle, about choosing a family, what I also found in your book was Bert's journey was a great sense of acceptance of the family that she discovered, and kind of finding, just accepting that part of herself that I also felt like was part of your journey with your book, Julie. Really beautiful, grappling with difficult issues. You watch these two women accept what is there and be able to, thrive with that I really responded to. And both, they're such gorgeous books. So we have two questions. The first is to Julie, and then Danielle, there's a question for you. This is from Diane Hurwitz. Julie, thank you so much for your hauntingly beautiful book. I too am a daughter of a Vienna-born Holocaust survivor mother. Do you think that there is a legacy of otherness as part of our history?
Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Yeah, I would say that this is sort of, I think, a continual conflict of sort of trying to identify what it is to be an American. So a lot, of course, the Viennese Jews who came here, German Jews who came here, Jews from all over Europe who arrived, had to sort of reinvent themselves. And that is, to me, really the American experience at its best, is a kind of reinvention. At the same time, I will say that I do feel very close to Europe. And so that's stayed with me all my life, a feeling of kinship with European culture. So in a way, I feel I'm an American, of course, but I do feel a tug to the places that were historical.
Do you think that, I'm just going to ask real quick, do you think that that's imparted from your mother? Were there certain customs that she had that you adopted, or?
Part of it was the food. She was Viennese. They're very well known for their cuisine. She was an amazing baker, and she continued doing all those things. Also, there was a lot of the things that they managed to bring with them. They came with 2 trunks, and in the trunks, you had to make choices. That was all you could bring. So they brought a lot of hand embroidered linens and a few things, from the old country. They really feel old, and I really love them because they speak to this other time when, this other world. So whenever I've gone back to Vienna and to also other countries in Europe where you really see a way of life that does acknowledge and cherish the old in a different way than we do here. It's sort of a joke in New York City, where I grew up, that, if you go away for 2 months, your neighborhood will be unrecognizable. And honestly, that has happened to me, where I've gone away for a vacation and come back, and you look around, what happened to that store and what happened to that restaurant? But in Europe, you do feel this kind of continuity. And I think that's something I also really appreciated in your book, that there is this kind of thread of a family with roots going back so far. And so I think for me, when I started doing my research, I knew I wouldn't be able to go back that far, but I wanted to see, how far I could go back and what I could find that would sort of help me feel that connection. So to the questioner, I would just say, yeah, there is, I think you're always going to feel, I think it's good to hold on to the heritage that you have and find a way to make that feel alive for you. At the same time, we're living in a country of immigrants, so we're all from somewhere else.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Julie. And this is from Megan to Danielle. The Ancestor is one of the best books I've read in the last few years. I completely agree. Luca's arc really moved me. Without spoiling it for anyone else, is there anything you can say to comfort me? Did you consider other ways for that subplot to turn out?
Yeah, so I love Luca too. Luca, if that's Bert's husband, estranged husband. And, I'll just say that they don't get back together, right? So, and I did that. And his, what happened with Luca happened because I very strongly felt that this had to be Bert's story and her journey. And also this book is working in something like it's called Gothic, right? The Gothic tradition. And it's been often in reviews compared to books like, the Brontes or Frankenstein, right? It has that sort of vibe going on in it. And in the late 19th century, and then like in the 1940s and 50s here in the States, Gothic fiction was often associated with romance. It was Gothic romance, right? Where there was like a Heathcliffian character and there was like some melodramatic love affair and the woman was swept off her feet and everything, everything was made better by a marriage. And I really wanted to undermine that trope. I wanted to undermine that possibility that Bert would be saved by a happy, melodramatic sort of Byron character. so they didn't get back together, and Bert goes off sort of on her own and finds motherhood and happiness, or a family in her own way without Luca. And I've had a lot of people write to me. Actually, that's probably one of the most common emails I get is, I miss Luca. Like, why didn't Bert get together with Luca? And, are you going to write a sequel with, something about Luca? But, that it just had to be Bert's story. So
it's hard to kill off characters, right? Yeah.
It's hard.
I think I lost some characters too in my story, where you realize they're only going to appear, for a short time, and that they can't be part of the main character's story, because your heroine, I really see the connection to the Brontes, where really you have a heroine, say in Jane Eyre, or, where really she's on her own and she has to figure it out. There is, of course, a romance in that novel, but it's really all comes from inside her, and you won't really experience that unless you have that character forced to, chart her own path. In my story, the main characters are also my grandparents, whom I never met. And so a lot of my work in writing the book was imagining my grandparents and giving them life. I only knew them from photographs and from stories my dad told me. He was very close to them. But I really wanted them to come alive as humans, and I wanted to show their love of life and enjoyment, and also their love for each other. So that was, I think it's so important to really allow your characters to really become themselves in the way that they need to for your story. I think we have some other questions, or
yes.
Yeah.
Elise, actually. Elise, do you want to ask, or should I ask for you? I'll just jump in for you. Julie and Danielle, maybe Danielle, we can start with you. What are some books that moved you personally while you were doing your research for this novel?
So I went back and did a lot of reading in the Gothic tradition. So I reread Jane Eyre. I reread Wuthering Heights, which is my favorite. And I reread Frankenstein. I reread, I don't know, do you know a writer called Wilkie Collins, 19th century? Very different than my book, but also there's just the flavor of this sort of old world sensibility. Often his novels are set in large houses. So it gave me the sensations that I wanted to include in my book. And, but honestly, while a lot of it was reading, to sort of get the tone and the genre, for me, really I went to the Aosta Valley for 10 days, I think. And that trip was pivotal. I had a draft of the book, a very rough sort of skeletal draft down when I went, but after I went, the book came alive, right? Like all of the things that I saw when I was there. I stayed in a castle. I walked in the Alps. I looked at the different sort of flora and fauna everywhere.
Danielle, what time of year was it? Do you mind telling us? Because you create the seasons and the weather so powerfully. I mean, it's another character.
Actually, it was in May. It was in May.
But it must still have been cold.
It was still cold. There was still snow.
Beautiful. Okay, sorry.
And so no, yeah. So and I was able to, I guess because I went at May, I was able to see a little bit of both. Like there were flowers coming up. It was spring. We could walk to there were these little kind of like, I want to say like shepherd's huts. Like I don't know if that's exactly what they were, that were then made into restaurants. So you could hike and then you'd stop off in this stone restaurant that had these sort of fish scale slate roofs. Like just amazing, probably 500 years old or something. And you'd go and you'd have just a simple meal where they'd have a board with charcuterie and cheese and a glass of wine. And it just was so simple, but it was enough to really give me all of the energy that I wanted to bring to the book.
Yeah, there were a few books that I read that were really also very important while I was working. There was one book that I kept on my desk for the entire time while I was working, which was Edmund de Val's The Hare with Amber Eyes. I'm sure some of you have come across this very beautiful memoir where he tells the story of his family by tracing the history of a collection of little tiny Japanese netsuke, which are those very small little carved animals. And when I first read that book, that really gave me hope, because there were certain objects in my family story too that I wanted to be able to share, and that they really had to become part of the plot. They were quite pivotal in the story of my family. So that was one book that really I read several times and just kept it as a kind of a, I don't know, guardian angel at my desk. The other books, I read a number of other books which were more history. One of them is a book by, I think she's Swedish, her name is Elizabeth Asbrink. The book is called 1947, and that book was really a mind blower. It tells the story of a year that most of us don't think of as very important, very pivotal. It's 2 years after the end of World War II, but in fact, it was a very momentous year, and she sort of charts all the historical threads, everything that was going on through that year. The other book that I wish every American would read is a book by Sarah Churchwell. She is an American who works in England, teaches in England. The book is called Behold America, and it is the history of two ideas that we talk about a lot in America, which are the history of America first, this idea, America first, and also the idea of the American dream. And she charts how they intertwine from the beginning, really the founding of the country, till the present day. And it's really extremely illuminating. So those are 3 books that really were very important to me, but there are many others. I did, like Danielle, I did a lot of reading, wide-ranging reading. Are there other questions? Let's see, shall we? Okay, let's see. Well, we can continue with, talking about, I think, some of the other work that we did while writing. I was curious, Danielle, if you wanted to talk a little bit about sort of a bit of your process while writing this book and how the drafts I think some people always imagine that you sit down and you write a draft and maybe you revise it a few times and then you're done, right? But that's not how I work. And I imagine that's not how this book evolved either.
No, and I'm writing another novel right now, and I'm in this stage where I want to pull my hair out because I have a draft, but I have an idea of how good it could be, but I have the reality of how messy and bad it is right now. And that gap between the imagination and what you know it can be with just the right amount of luck and hard work, and what it is in that after that first draft. This is the point where I think the difference between a writer who makes it and one who doesn't, right? Makes it meaning like you get that book that you want to write.
Mhm.
Because yeah, the drafts and the stamina and the ability to believe in something when it feels like it's maybe not going to work, or maybe it was a foolhardy idea to even try it, is so important. So, and in all of my other books, including my memoirs, most of the structure is very layered with lots of letters and flashbacks and different characters coming in, different points of view. This book, I made a goal for myself. I'm going to start in one spot with this one character, and she is going to go on a journey that does not break. We're not going to let anybody else talk. We're not going to let anybody else put in a point of view except her all the way till the end. And when I do break that in one spot, I have a journal that comes in at the end from a character named Eleanor. There's a journal that we get a different point of view that I pretty much hold with that. So that was my, structural sort of goal. And all of the drafts revolved around just getting that point of view correct, right? I think in different books, you have different, challenges. And for me, this was my challenge in this book.
I really believe, and maybe it's just rationalizing my own experience as a writer, that there's always this time that you reach where you're just in the pit of despair and you're sure that you've just made a terrible mistake.
I'm right there right now with this new book. Yeah. Today I stared at my computer and I was like, what am I doing?
Yeah. But I actually have come to feel that it really is part of the process and pretty essential, that you sort of have to get, I guess in a film script, they call it the dark night of the soul. And you sort of have to get there so that you can reach that moment of enlightenment, so to speak, where you sort of have some insight into how to do it. I was, with this book, the structure is very braided. So there's myself as the narrator, and then there are the events that are happening in the past. And the trick was, how am I going to weave these together in a way that won't be disruptive for the reader, that the reader will feel like there's me, the narrator, and I'm taking you on a journey. And sometimes we're going into the past, and sometimes you're living parts of my life. And the reason why I felt I wanted to do it, in part, is because there was quite a long time period while I was working on the book, and I thought, well, I was living my life. I was doing other work. I was writing another book and publishing another book, and I had a child, and we had a family life, and all kinds of things were happening. So I felt that I wanted to figure out a way to do that. But at one point, I just remember I had the chapter stacks in piles, and I was almost literally rearranging them, trying to figure out, how is this possibly going to work? And am I mad? This is when I would say that one of the most beautiful things that's happened to me as a writer has been time at residencies, where you walk away from everything, you bring your pads of paper and your laptop with you, and for often I'm not away for that long, maybe a few weeks, but it's just being alone and away from everybody else that has really helped me sort of find that moment and kind of crawl out of the dark place. But it's, yeah, I don't like to count how many drafts I write, but no, it's I'm sure that you've had similar experiences with your previous books as well.
Hi, I guess I have a little visitor. She's coming to say good night.
Mothering. How cute. Yeah.
Daddy. Speaking of interruptions, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's sort of the story of our lives now, is having to be very flexible.
Yes.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
do have another question in the chat of I see
Okay.
from Robin. Just curious if either Julie or Danielle have any desire to switch genres and write fiction or nonfiction in Danielle's case. What do you think?
You want to take it first, Danielle?
So interesting. I've written 2 memoirs and I've written 3 novels. So come on, time to brush your teeth. Yeah, bye-bye.
Hi.
Bye-bye, sweetie. And so where was I? Yeah, so I have switched genres, and I write a column for the New York Times Book Review, which really has me like sort of shift into another way of thinking. So yeah, I've done that. But Julie, I don't think you've written fiction, have you?
Well, it's funny that you would mention that, because in this book, in EVA and EVE, there are some passages that I fictionalized. I had to do this because of all those missing holes that I was describing in the narrative. So the way I chose to do it in this memoir was with full disclosure, where I announced to the reader, we're going to imagine something, please come with me. And I promise you it's based on lots of research, and I did my homework, but in fact, I'm imagining the scene. But having that experience, I had not written any fiction prior. Having this experience of writing those passages actually has inspired me, and the project I'm working on now is fiction. So it's going to deal with similar kinds of research, because I find I really love doing the research. I love feeling grounded in the research, and then I feel like I can take liberties where I want to. I think you're the same, that you really like to do that work first. But so we'll see what happens with this next project. I'm just a bit of a way in working on it, and I love doing the work and imagining the history. Again, it'll be historical, but at the same time, it will be a departure. So it's an interesting question.
That's exciting.
Yeah,
I'm excited. Read that, Julie.
Yeah, just at the beginning. Is there, let's see, are there more? Well, did someone ask what was the third book? I wasn't quite clear on that question there.
I think they're referring to, you said that you read, there were 3 main books that you
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, there were the books were The Hair with Amber Eyes. There was Elizabeth Asbrink's 1947. And then the last book is Sarah Churchwell's book, Behold America.
Right.
Yeah, so those 2, the second 2 are, well, The Hair with Amber Eyes is a memoir. The other 2 books are works of history, but I'll just say that both of these writers can really tell a story. So if a book of history can be a page turner, both of those are. I very much recommend them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So do we have time to continue, or more? Are we?
If you would like to
Close to the hour?
continue, we could go another 10 minutes or so.
Okay. Yeah, just want to make sure that we had time. Yeah. So Danielle, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're working on now, without any spoilers, and just sort of the process that you're engaged in now?
So I'm writing another novel. It's, of course, very different than this one. I seem to like to reinvent the wheel every time I write. So yeah, I'll say that I don't even know how to describe it. I will say that it's set it's contemporary, pretty much before the pandemic, which is actually another interesting thing. All the writers who are writing contemporary fiction now are having lots of interesting acrobatics that they have to perform to figure out whether they're going to include the pandemic into their fiction or how they're going to write about it. And that's I think, as a reader, in the next few years, I'm going to be interested to see how that plays out. But I'm writing a novel. it's, it's partially set upstate New York in a big old Victorian mansion. And so it's a little bit spooky in places. Part of it is set in New York City. And part of it is, I'll say that one thing that I can say about the main character, it's a man who is very good at solving puzzles. So I have some puzzles in the book, actually. So that's been a challenge for me. I'm working with someone who actually constructs puzzles because I can't do that myself.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? It's one of the, I'm interested that you're writing from the point of view of a man, because that's of course also a challenge when you want to switch up your point of view in that way.
Right. I mean, it's a third person perspective, but yes, if I am, sort of seeing the world from his point of view, but I also have a female point of view. And then I have this is another one of those books that has lots of letters and points of view and lots of characters telling different stories. So it's back to the crazy, very layered book to organize, which is probably why I was sitting at my desk today, staring at my manuscript saying, what are you doing? But I'm having a lot of fun with this. And it's a book that I think will be a pleasure to read when I finally organize it in a way that it's not driving me insane.
Yeah, it's so interesting because the project I'm working on now involves math, and sort of like you with puzzles. This is not my skill set whatsoever. I sort of top out around 5th or 6th grade math. So one of the great pleasures of starting this project has been hunting down somebody who would be willing to talk with me about being a mathematician. And one of the things, of course, you discover is sort of back to the beginning of what we were talking about, is just the endless amazement of the variety of humans there are, and the way that people think, and how we're all the same species, but in fact, we are all such individuals. And talking to this woman who's been very generous with her time to teach me a bit about, advanced algebra, good Lord, because I never took it and I never studied it at all. But she's just so taken with its beauty. That's the word she'll use to describe it, that it's beautiful. And I think, well, that is just wonderful for me, that you meet somebody who has that passion and is able to communicate that passion. So this book is actually involving quite a bit of that, where I have to find people who know how to do things that I don't know at all. So it's kind of an adventure already, and I haven't left my house. So eventually there will be some travel research, but for the last year, of course, all of us, we've just been here in our home, and that is something that I think we're all going to have to address. And I like you, I'm very curious to see what novels emerge from this time, what memoirs and novels emerge from this time.
Yeah. There's a question about our book covers. Someone asked, someone has said that both are gorgeous covers, and I know Julie's parents worked in publishing and that she has a background in graphic design. And Robin would like us to talk a little bit our book covers.
Well, I love talking about my book cover because I love how beautifully it came out. It just really pleases me. The thing that was interesting, in this case, I did not design my book cover, but what's uncanny to me is the designer who did this cover had never seen the original poesy album that inspired it, but in fact, it's quite a dead ringer for it. So I felt very moved because I realized she had read the book and that she had some idea in her mind based on that. So yeah, my parents worked both at Simon & Schuster, and in fact, this book is published by an imprint of Simon & Schuster. So, and how did you come to your cover? Did you work with the designer? Because it really seems like so much your vision.
Yeah, so this is the cover, and I did work with the designer. I felt very strongly that it had to have kind of a classical Gothic feeling. And you know, a designer at HarperCollins came up with the basic layout. It was quite different than this originally. I
Mhm.
asked them to bring in the purple. It was originally gray, like black and white, basically.
Mm,
And I said, I think we need some color, but not bright color. Let's bring in some purple. And then we brought in more mountains. Like, so it was a process, right? It was a
Mhm.
process. And I do like the cover. And, you know, I love your cover too, Julie. And that's amazing that the designer.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I love also, I mean, I think one of the things that your cover and my cover are really about is the location. And for me, I mean, there was something quite magical about this cityscape that the designer found, but also amazing to me is there's a little building, it's right here. And I've been to my mother's house a few times in Vienna, and this building, I know it's not the building, but it looks quite a lot like it. It's the same color and the same kind of classical style. I think both of our books are really about kind of these lost periods in history and this rediscovery. So I also was hoping and was happy to get such a classical interpretation that really feels like you're going on some time travel, because, you know, I think that's a lot of what I did, and I was glad that the cover could communicate that to readers. So I'm very happy that everybody likes the covers. They're very important. I think it's your cover. I like the color that they introduced, because the scenes in your book that are so especially vivid to me are the winter scenes, and it sort of gives it a kind of coldness that, you know, was really something that you feel in that castle. You know, you imagine this huge, enormous building that's underheated and everybody's cold inside, and you know, you really can feel it. So I think that
You want to light a fire, you want to have a fire in the fireplace and wrap up.
Yeah, yeah, it's sort of big drafty old houses. So I think, which are always the perfect setting for Gothic novels, you know.
With that, I think that I will turn it over to Elizabeth at Dobbs
Mhm.
Ferry to thank you, ladies, so much. This was
Mhm.
really, really a great talk, really a
Yeah.
great discussion.
Thank you, Elise.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Elizabeth?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you all so much. Can you hear me? I'm not sure I'm
No.
okay, good.
Mhm.
Thank you, Julie and Danielle. What a great talk about two very different but really interesting books. And I have to say, I haven't gotten to read them yet. So now I'm even more so. I really want to experience both of them, and they really sound great. And thank you so much for joining us. I know Delane had to leave, but I really appreciate her bringing you to the library system and to all of our patrons. And thank you, patrons, for joining us tonight. If you want to experience more of these wonderful events, you can go to bookyaya.com and also look on Hendrick Hudson's website and the Dobbs Ferry Library website for future events. We love having authors with us, and it really is a wonderful event to be able to share your process and your stories. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having us. It's been a real pleasure. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for the clapping. Okay, well, we hope we'll see you soon, and it's been a great evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good luck to you all also.
Bye.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.